Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Businessology Show, sponsored by our firm, Blummer CPAs. We work with digital agencies, helping them transform, grow, and all the ups and downs that comes with in life. And I don't think we've ever had a guest on 3 times, but Kade Wilcox is on with us today, and he is no stranger to growth agencies, and you've already heard his story on other shows, but you're going to be hearing a little different spin on the show today. But Kade's been doing this for well over a decade in the digital marketing space, building agencies really big. He started really his career in ministry at churches, leading church camps and things like that. But now he's the CEO of Flatland, a digital marketing agency, and they're focused on helping companies grow through the branding, web, content marketing, and things like that. So, Kade, welcome to the Businessology Show for the 3rd time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. You're a good friend, and it's an honor and a privilege to be here, and hope that between the two of us, we can add a lot of value and help to those that are listening.
Yeah. Well, and so, Kade, what you're talking about is this is going to be a real show because your journey of growth has gone skyrocket on rocket ships to not being rocket ships. So I've shared some questions with you, and I want to get real on the show. So you're good, right? You give me public permission here to get real on this show, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Isn't it crazy you even have to ask permission to just be honest and be truthful?
Yeah. But I want to make I know how you would answer that question because that's the kind of person you are, very honest, transparent, and truthful. So I really want to give the guests a little, the reality of what the heck we're kind of talking about. So really, what's happened in the past year in your life?
Sure.
There's a question. Wow.
Yeah. It's a lot. Maybe just briefly, just for those that, maybe never listened to the first couple of episodes.
Yeah.
My wife and I started an agency in 2011, and it was really just a little side hustle. It was intended just to provide some supplemental income. And really over the course of over 10 years, almost 11 years, we grew the agency. At one point, we had over 50 employees. At the height,
50,
we were
you
a
said.
Little over 50. Yeah,
50. Yeah, that's a pretty big agency. Yeah.
Yeah. Grew just slightly over $4 million in revenue, and so lots of lessons learned through that. But it all kind of culminated. 2022 was a hard year. We lost everything.
Oh my gosh!
And so just to I guess summarize kind of the depth of it. All of this happened within about a year's time. I'm an entrepreneur, so I've owned a lot of different businesses. So sold a business and ended up losing just under $1 million personally. So that happened. I ran for public office. I failed a lot privately, but I've never kind of lost in public. And so losing a race like that publicly was a new experience for me, and honestly quite difficult. So that happened. And then we lost our agency for a lot of reasons, and so that was tough. Ended up selling our cabin in the mountains, sold our dream home that we'd planned on living in the rest of our life. And at the age of 39, found ourselves kind of starting over. So that was 2022, and super, super hard. It's been quite a journey, but honestly, really grateful for it, and have, by God's grace, learned a lot really through that failure.
Wow. So why? I guess my question is, why was 2022 like that? Why did all of that happen? That's a pretty broad question.
Yeah, sure. There's really kind of 2 ways I've looked at it. So I've been really fortunate and have had a lot of help from friends, from you and Julie, to really kind of lean into all the failure, to lean into the experience, and to really press in and kind of learn from it. And at a high level, there's really 2 things that I've learned. But then, over the last 10 months, as I've reflected and leaned into this, there are really kind of 8 things that I've learned about really my failure of leadership, my failure of character, that I think resulted in the culmination of losing the company. I didn't lose my company just in one day. It was a culmination of years of decision and lack of character and things like that I'm happy to go into. But kind of at a high level, there's really two things that I think created the loss and the failure and all these things, but in particular losing our primary company and the company we started. I became more focused on building my own kingdom instead of God's. I became more concerned about serving my own needs and my own aspirations and my own desires versus, loving and serving God and loving and serving others. And that's hard to say out loud, because one of the things that really propelled our growth in the early years was this just life-changing moment I had when I read a book by Tim Keller called Every Good Endeavor, where I actually saw the gifts that I have and my work as a way to love him and to love others. So then to lose it all because of lack of doing that, has been very humbling. I think another thing I've learned is just the consequences and the ramifications of, an undisciplined pursuit of more, just always pursuing more. And never really being satisfied. And that idea over the course of a decade of my life has caused tremendous harm and consequence to my success. And so that's been really hard to kind of wrestle with. I think ambition is a really good thing, but left unchecked, it will wreck you. And I've always had a lot of ambition, but unfortunately, I think I got to a place where I was unwise in that ambition and undisciplined in that ambition, and it caused a lot of harm. So there are 8 specific things over the last year that I feel like I've learned, and I'd be happy to kind of bullet point those for you, because I think a lot of maybe leaders struggle with similar things. But at a high level, those are the things that I think, as I've reflected, have caused, a lot of the failure and produced a lot of the results of the failure.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think maybe we'll weave those in as we go. What is there one thing that kind of triggered? I guess you listed some other things that were hard in 2022, a lot of hard things. We're going to focus on the agency that you and your wife started, that you're no longer with, that you say you lost. What was maybe a triggering point where it began down the road of losing that? Is there a trigger point? And again, Kate, you and I have talked. We're trying to do this to help other people, right? To see what can they hear and learn. So is there a triggering point somebody else would need to watch out for? It's like, hey, that's a sign of you going down the wrong road. What would that be? Or multiple things? I don't know.
Man, there's a list of 100 things that I wish I would have seen in myself and in my leadership, 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. But if I had to boil it down to one thing, it's this transition I made from serving others to serving myself. I think a lot of my early motivations, in my work and in exercising my gifts and growing the company and doing the things that I was doing, really was motivated at a desire to serve others. It was to serve our clients. I love growing teams and hiring people and being responsible for everything that's related to that. And I really do think that that's what motivated our initial desire and ambition and caused us to be successful. And when I stopped doing that, I didn't recognize it. When I made that transition from serving others to serving myself, serving my own ambitions, serving my own goals, serving my own financial needs, pursuing things because it's what I wanted. And I think that started this kind of long, slow process of kind of losing, a grip on good leadership. And then it started impacting all kinds of other things, relationships, my character, my ability to lead. And so while I think there are a lot of variables and a lot of different things that I did and decisions made and practices of leadership, I think ultimately that's probably the one thing that was kind of a common thread throughout all the things is that I really lost sight of why are you doing this and who are you serving? And I didn't see it. I didn't see it in myself. I didn't have the maturity to look in the mirror and to catch myself. And so I think that's one of the biggest contributors to the entire experience. Yeah.
So to say that back to you, it's really a loss of the purpose that was driving you in the original reason why you got into the agency, which leads to undisciplined, unbounded pursuit of more. And that's real common. I went through that in my own life. And in one practical way, we see that in agency owners is a lot of times as they grow, their personal income expands with the amount of the growth of the agency. And so their personal income becomes so large. What that does is it produces a lifestyle that can't be pulled back when the agency needs to go through contraction sometimes. And so organizations, they expand, they go through contraction, and that expansion and contraction depend on market situations and changes they need to make, pivots to business models, those affect. But if the income of the owner is so large that that owner's income needs such a large amount of cash to support a certain lifestyle, these are things I got into too, then it really hits home when there's no choice but to reduce that income, or you start actually losing that. So that's a practical view. And that sounds like you listed some personal things too. Is that something you experienced, that practical effect?
Oh yeah. That's lesson number 6 out of 8. So
okay.
What's is this really bad practice of so integrating your personal life and your personal finances in that of the business, that when one or the other are impacted, they're inseparable. And it's such a common practice, I think, of business owners.
It is.
But it's so detrimental both to the agency and the people you're leading, but also to the individual. And for me, it got so big and so intertwined that then it started impacting these character, issues, which are lesson 2 and 3, which is contentment and focus. So now you're on a hamster wheel. You're never content. You're never focused. So you're always doing more. Yeah. And the more you do, the bigger it gets. And the more intertwined, all your personal finances and your personal needs get integrated into the success of the business. And then one of those little puzzle pieces, if you remove it, it's like a Jenga board or that Jenga game thing.
Yeah.
You remove something, and all of a sudden, the risk is the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah.
And the longer you do it, the more risky it becomes. And so, yes, I think what you're saying is part of exactly what happened, and it is really natural, I think, for business owners to do, particularly when you're small. You're like, how's this going to hurt anything?
Yeah.
But then when you grow and you evolve and you mature, but that part of you and that part of the business doesn't grow and mature, it has massive consequences. And I think I experienced those in my own doing, in the worst possible way.
Yeah. I think it's probably, Kate, it'd probably be good to, and you've touched on a few of them, but to hit those 8 lessons learned.
Sure.
I think kind of going through those one at a time, that's really going to be a lot of the meat of what I think we need to talk about. You want to walk through those?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just give you the bullet points, and if there's one that you want to unpack, more deeply, I'm more than happy to do so. But there's a few things I want to say. First of all, these didn't just come to me in the morning, this, but we've been on this journey now almost a year. It's, we're a few months away from this being a whole year. And so these are things that have happened in reflection and consideration. My list of lessons kind of started at 50 things. Yeah. And then as I reflected and leaned into them, I was able to kind of narrow them down to these 8 things. The other thing I want to say very quickly is I take full responsibility and accountability for this. I think other people contributed in some ways, but ultimately I feel entirely responsible. So I hope your listeners never hear me say something and feel like I'm blaming someone else, because I don't feel that, and I know that to not be the case. So the 8 things is, I mentioned the first one. I didn't pursue Jesus. I got focused on my own kingdom, my own needs, my own wants, and not serving Him. Second lesson and third lesson are contentment and focus. I just never was content. I always wanted more. And then the more I would get involved in, lesson number 3 was focus. I was not focused. I started a nonprofit. I bought other service businesses. I bought a payroll company. I ran for office. I was doing all these different things, and I was not focused, and had a lot of consequences. Lesson 4 was the abdication of leadership. I feel very gifted in building teams, and I think I've bore fruit of that. But I think one of my major leadership failures was abdicating leadership too quickly. So I would hire the right people. I'd put the right people in leadership positions, but then I would not walk alongside of them and support them and train them and, collaborate on expectations and what success looks like.
Yeah.
And not walk alongside of them the way that a good leader walks alongside the people they're leading. So I abdicated leadership. I made the business about me. Even though I had a big team and we had incredible leaders and I had a business partner, mentally, it was always mine. It was always my business, even though it wasn't my business. It was our business. And even though I knew that on paper, I didn't act like that. And I didn't think that way appropriately. And so again, I made it all about me. And I wasn't doing it consciously, right?
Yeah.
It's like I didn't wake up every morning and say, I'm going to be selfish. I'm going to be a selfish leader today. But I did. In practice, by the way I was leading and making decisions, I was making the business about me. I mentioned lesson number 6 was finances and profitability. What I mean by finances is what you already mentioned was really making the business kind of a slave to my personal needs and my personal needs a slave to the business and intertwining those. And then what I mean by profitability is just a lack of focus on finances for a long time.
Yeah.
And when you're struggling as a business financially, it exasperates all these other things that are also challenges.
Yeah.
It exposes them in a way that they're not exposed when everything's fine financially. So not taking the finances seriously soon enough is another major lesson I learned. And then 7 and 8, the 7th lesson was a lack of accountability. I just lacked accountability, and it wasn't always that way. In the early days of Primitive, that I worked with you and coached with you for a couple of years. After you, I worked with another agency for a few years, or a guy named Mike Lieberman who owns an agency. So I had kind of coaching and collaboration with him. And then I went through this season where I had nobody. And it was, not necessarily by design. I just didn't pursue coaching and accountability. Yeah. And that lack of accountability, I think, created an environment where, again, I just kind of pursued my own ambition with nothing checking it, nothing holding it accountable. And I think it was a huge, huge mistake I made in my leadership that not only cost me, but impacted others negatively for which I'm super, sad about. Yeah. And then 8, and this is probably one of the harder ones to say out loud, is just an unhealthy relationship to people.
What does that mean?
I never set out to use people for my own gain. Like I don't ever recall like consciously thinking like, well, I'm going to hire this person, or I'm going to, put this person in this position so I can use them to accomplish my own good. But as I've reflected over the last year on my relationship to people, and I've considered, even some of the burned bridges and burned relationships that I have over the course of really the last 5 years, particularly, I think it really is driven by my own healthy relationship with people. That when people or leaders met my needs in terms of my expectations and what I thought success looked like for our company, everything was good. When they didn't, I would just like move on from them. So, it kind of expressed itself in a lot of different ways. But I think the reality is, instead of, looking at relationships as how can I serve you so that we're collectively successful, I began to look at relationships as how does this relationship bring value to my own agenda, my own ambitions, and my own expectations. And again, I didn't wake up one morning and just decide to do that. I think it was birthed out of this unhealthy, pattern of not having accountability and, all these things that I shared. But having this unhealthy relationship to people, ultimately, I think contributed, as did these other things, to losing the company, because I lost credibility, I lost trust. And even for a lot of those folks, I doubt they ever consciously thought about that in the moment. But certainly in hindsight, I'm sure they might feel the same way, when we look at the consequences of that. So I think those are the 8 things that I've really pressed into. And there are other things, but I've always felt like they were connected to one of those 8 things. And it's been humbling. It's really hard to look in the mirror. It's really hard. It's really hard, not to blame others or to blame circumstances. But as I've worked through this, over the 10 months with my wife and with my, 2 or 3 of my best friends and you and Julie, I think these are things I did that they're a failure of character and maturity and, growth and accountability and developing as a leader. And, it's really hard, because I did all these things and there's no going back. There's no going back. You can't undo it. Yeah. And so, hopefully by God's grace, I learned from these things and the future will be shaped by these ideas and these things of real focus. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So that's that's kind of impactful for you to list them because we walked through a lot of that with you. So I just want to honor that space and you sharing that. So thank you for doing that because everybody struggles with all this. One thing I found out in my leadership early on is that emotionally, through hard times, my emotions really get in the way. They really produce major clouds in my life, and then I do unhealthy things, towards other people. And through all this, you went through an emotional journey. Some of that in some of our sessions. How do you do this emotionally? And maybe it's like you journal like crazy. Like you anytime we're all together, you're always writing stuff down. So you journal the heck out of everything. But how do you deal with the impact of the emotion on this in a healthy way? And again, we're trying to help other leaders learn. Yeah. Because leadership, especially in a human organization that is one with people, it's very emotional. It's going to be emotional. How do you deal with your emotions and managing those so that I can learn how to do it?
Yeah. I think back to the first 2 or 3 months where it kind of became real that this was all unraveling, and I think my initial responses were kind of self-preservation and anger. You're kind of in the moment, and you're trying to self preserve what you have. You're trying to protect what you feel like is yours and, all these things. And sadly, that creates a lot of consequential decisions that, and the way that you handle the situation. One of my greatest regrets is that when all this kind of started unfolding and unraveling is I didn't have the ability to step back and to consider and to reflect and to think, okay, what are the different ways that we can handle this in a healthy way to preserve what we have? And instead, I kind of curled up in the fetal position. It's like, I'm going to protect my feelings, my emotions, my future, all these things. So that was my initial response. And then, as I had a lot of help, right? And as I had that help, I started to see it a bit different. First of all, when I was able to kind of start separating myself from that emotional response of self-perseverance and anger, I really started spending legitimate time with the Lord and trying to gain wisdom and try to see things the way He sees things. I was extremely fortunate with relationships. My wife was a tremendous help to me. Maddie and Landon and Bryce and Dusty, my very close friends were huge helps to me.
Other entrepreneurs.
You and Julie. Yeah. Well, and just friends. That, they're really deep, meaningful relationships started to speak truth. And not always in my defense, right? No. They were being very honest. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times they were saying or recommending or sharing wisdom that directly conflicted with my own response or my own emotion or my own desire. And so their willingness to love me with hard truth and good truth was very helpful. Yeah. And the same of you and Julie, right? Yeah. We started coaching really early on in this and y'all's truth and not letting me get away with things, everybody challenged me. My wife challenged me, my friends challenged me, y'all challenged me. And you didn't allow me just to frame this in my own narrative and not lean into it. I mean, how many calls do we have, where Miss Julie would say, okay, we got to lean into that. Let's not run away from that. Let's not just move on. Let's lean into that.
Yeah, she says that.
I think that, yeah, it's good. And that hard coaching, I think, was really good. Yeah. And then I think the last thing that really helped me process it and understand it and figure out how, not only what we've learned, but where are we going, all these things started coming together by what you mentioned, just journaling. And there were things that, and this happened over months. Again, it wasn't just like one morning I like just wrote all this down.
Yeah.
But over the course of months, I literally remember I took my Jeep out to this canyon, a couple hours from our house. It's a state park. And I spent the night out there in my Jeep, and I spent some time in the evening reflecting. And this question came to me, and it was, what are you going to do with this? All these things are happening.
Yeah.
What are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
Because there's all kinds of options you have when you're experiencing failure or mistakes, or you're coming face to face with your own failure. Yeah. There's all kinds of options. And so I said, okay, what path are you going to take? What are you going to do with this? And I just decided I really wanted to learn from it. And I also decided I never wanted to be here again.
Yeah.
I don't want to repeat this.
No.
I don't want to experience this loss again. And so I wrote down, the lessons I shared. I wrote down principles and themes that I'd seen throughout my life, and particularly the last 10 years in leadership and character and all these things. I wrote down what rebirth, and I called it rebirth, the great reset. I wrote down what I thought maybe that could look like. Yeah. I processed vocationally because I felt like I'd lost everything. I processed vocationally. It's like, okay, who are you going to be, and what are you going to do, and what does your vocation look like moving forward? And then lastly, I wrote down a roadmap. And some of that roadmaps happened, and other parts of it, were completely missing the mark. But I just tried to process all those things out of a desire. I move on from things very quickly. I've been that way my entire life. I fall down, I get up, I lose a game, I move on to the next game. I make a mistake, I move on to the next thing. Have an argument with my wife, like all spouses, and 5 minutes later, I'm fine. You can probably guess if she's fine 5 minutes later, if she's not. So I just have always moved on from things. And I'm glad that I'm aware of that, because I didn't feel like in this experience, the right thing to do was just to move on. No. I literally remember telling you and Julie early on, I don't want to move on from this. And one of my concerns was I was having to make a lot of decisions just kind of practically, like, how am I going to feed my family? Yeah. And how am I going to pay off the debt from the lost business? And where are we going to live? And like all these practical things you kind of have to make decisions on. And I was really afraid, honestly, that I was going to move on and just move through this. And I'm glad that we didn't do that. And even to this day, you and I and Julie talk about it regularly. And so I know that's a lot, for your listeners to absorb, but I think considering how you experience failure, even if they're small failures within your leadership, how you deal with failure and how you address it and how you experience it and how you move on from it is a really kind of important decision that every leader should reckon with. And, that's what I tried to do as imperfectly as it probably was. Yeah.
Well, that's huge. So I do want to stop right there. Cause we're talking about, hard, difficult leadership failures and lessons from those. And you're making a point, don't move on from those, dig in and learn from those. And I'm the same way. We have a couple of businesses, so I'm always moving really fast. And when my emotions get out of whack, I do tend to maybe hurt people. I can be hurtful because I'm moving on, but I can gain clarity, wrapping that emotion with truth, because emotions are just signals as to what we're feeling. They're not necessarily accurate. They may or may not be, but emotions are just kind of responses to the world around us. When I do stop and take time to process, I think you're saying your brain needs time to sort through all of this bucket of stuff and go, put it in order. What's wrong? Put that in the wrong column. Put stuff in the correct column, and then let the truth wrap around your emotions and kind of tell your emotions what to do. Am I describing well what you would say a leader is supposed to do when they go through these hard things?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's really well said. I do think it's important that I think sometimes people can get extremely self-deprecating, or, they can almost try to live in their failure as a way of punishing themselves for the failure. And so There is sometimes a practice of experiencing failure, and it's just like you try to discipline yourself almost as if that's penance. I don't think that's healthy. I do
That's
think,
a good point.
like we've talked for months about leaning in and not just moving on is really critical. In one of our last coaching calls, Julie, and I'm probably going to get it a little bit off, but she said something to this effect, and I've thought about almost every day since. And it was basically moving forward for me in this journey has been in the waiting. So moving forward has been in the waiting, and it almost sounds like a paradox, right? Like you can't do both. Like you can't both wait and stay in a place and move on at the same time.
Right.
But I think that what has meant for me when she said that, and as I've reflected on it, it is exactly this principle we're talking about leaning into the lessons and not just moving on. And so for me to move forward, so to speak, in my own leadership and my own character development and all these things that I need to grow in, there is a level, or there is a part of that journey which is just sitting on these lessons, and reflecting on them and leaning into them. The other thing that I did, and I think it supports this idea you and I are talking about, is I did it on these 8 lessons that I shared earlier. In my notes, so after I narrowed these 8 things down over the course of months, I went back in there and I basically created about a half a page of notes of specific examples over 10 years related to each issue.
Oh,
because I know how quickly I can justify things and go, okay, well, I learned from that. I'm moving on, So what I wanted to do is I wanted to tie reality to the principle, so I didn't create these kind of like fluffy narratives in my own head and in reality just move on with the exact same kind of leadership characteristics and things like that. And so they're right here, and they're always in front of me because, when I say I had an unhealthy relationship to people, and then I spent months thinking about specifics, I had to go in and write down people's names and experiences and things I did that hurt that person or used that person. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. When we say lean in or, really press into those things and don't move on too quickly. And maybe how I've learned from failure is not how one of your listeners will learn from failure. So my point is not do exactly what I did.
Yeah.
My main point is figure out as a leader how you're going to experience and learn from and grow from failure. And if you do that, maybe the expression of that is different for you. But I think the principle is important for all of us as leaders.
Well, and so is it true that every leader is probably going to experience failure? So learning the discipline of how to deal with failure is just a skill that everybody needs to learn. Would you say that?
I believe that to be true, because we're all failing, whether we acknowledge it or not. I think that's another hard thing that I've learned in reflecting on this is I had been failing in my leadership and character for years. Like I didn't just fail in one day and all of a sudden lost it all. It had been a pattern and a habit. And I did not recognize my failure of leadership and character.
You didn't know.
It culminated. I didn't. I didn't know because I wasn't pressing into it. I didn't have a practice or a discipline of saying, okay, how am I going to learn from my failure as a leader and character? And I didn't have that hard coaching and that accountability, right? That lack of accountability. And the result of that, the fruit of that is unchecked character deficiencies, leader deficiencies, and not learning from failure. So having a discipline or a practice of looking in the mirror, reflecting on the failure, and sitting in it, right? Leaning into it. I think it's a powerful thing that leaders, have to do if they want to grow in their leadership. Because if you don't do that, you're not going to be growing.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people can be accountable to a partner, right? So if you have a partner, that's a great way to gain accountability. You had a partner, but you also say, I had no accountability. So how did that work? You had a partner, but no accountability. So how do those sit together?
That's a good question. And
you can share whatever you feel comfortable sharing about that, So.
Sure.
I asked you a hard question.
It's a hard.
Yeah, it's one of the hard 8 lessons. So.
Yeah, it's hard because I've tried my entire life to be a good friend, a loyal friend. And I think in my business partnership, I think early on, we did some things practically that nurtured that relationship and created a really healthy environment for being business partners. Some really practical things like spending a lot of time together, spending time together as families, going to conferences together, dreaming about the business together. And over the course of time, that really changed. And I do think it had a substantial impact on our relationship and partnership, and therefore had a huge impact on ultimately, the business going in the direction that it did. And so, that is a hard question. And it's because I feel so much just remorse, honestly, in the way, that I let that relationship deteriorate over the course of time. And it's one of the things I wish I could, the things I wish I could undo. And so I try to spend a lot of time thinking on this because, I would like to do that better, so it is a hard question. Sorry that I don't have more substance for you there.
No, I have a partner.
It's really hard.
I have a partner, and I don't, it's not easy to lean into, those hard places. But I will say this, Kay, Julie and I have had the opportunity to walk through a lot of this with you, not all of it, but, a lot of it. And you go into it. There's a big bucket of crap, and you go walk in it and sit in it and look at it. And I know that's some of the ways you say you failed, but through this you did not. That is, you overcame that by going into it. And I think that's a lesson we can all learn is, for humans, hard things, man, we run away from those. Like, who wants to go into a hard thing, But, even now, this is still pretty raw. It's not even been quite a year, right? So it's still pretty raw. But, even that deficiency of who you could have been as a partner to that person, and just you'll go ahead and lean into the impact of that. And that's one thing you've done very consistently, right? And there are times you will struggle even with us, and we would challenge you, and you would say, bring it. I accept your challenge, and I'll go sit in that too. Tough, man, to keep, because it's like you keep taking hits over and over and over. And it's like, did you ever want to give up? Like, I'm done learning lessons. This is too much. When is too much to learn? I don't know.
I think it's probably a human thing to want to give up, at times. And certainly, I think particularly in the earlier months, when you're dealing with failure, I think it's a natural thing just to want to avoid it altogether. It's like kind of denial. Sure. You know what I mean? You're almost like in denial. But again, I would go back to the relationships I had, and that kind of denial or creating my own false narrative of all these things was never really an option, because I had people who loved me speaking truth and, really kind of calling me to be better, like calling me, to do the right thing and to go through this process and do all that. I wonder, it seems like we're good on time. I wonder if we could talk a bit about business partnership. I have some things that maybe I wish I would have done differently in the journey that might help someone who's either considering a business partnership or is in a partnership. But I would love to learn, what do you think are a couple of things that you would share about business partnerships for those either considering a partnership or in a partnership and need to kind of be shaken up a bit and kind of called to attention in this regard?
Me? Dude,
I'm happy to go first, but you're the expert here.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's not true. Well, probably my first year of partnership with Julie, we argued because I thought, hey, you're working with me already. Just come be my partner and still do the same things I want you to do. And that's not how Julie is. She's like, oh, no, this is my business now. I'm like, whoa, wait. And it was. And so she's not one to hold back on that. She had visions now for the company, and I was being faced with that. I think one thing I didn't realize in partnership is that you're actually entering into another relationship that you've got to maintain, care about, nurture, grow, spend time with, and all this has nothing to do with the business. So, now out of that, you get this business partner. Y'all can exponentially 10x the business. That is true about partnership. But I didn't realize it's actually a relationship that you enter into to check in. How are you doing? Are you struggling? Confronting each other with the ways in which they're acting hurtful towards one another. So you're dealing with all this relationship stuff, and I had no idea. And if I think a lot of what partners do when they do that, they leave. Right? They're like, I didn't know this, and so they don't have anything to do with it. I do like to run and hide. That's one of my responses to hard things in life. That's something I've learned. But I've stayed in when things were hard, and Julie has too. And so we've learned a lot about how to confront very truthfully, listen, hear it, let that truth kind of crush us a little bit. And, because, if I trust her, and I do, I want that truth to kind of crush what I'm thinking so that my thoughts can be broken up a little bit and then reformed into what's accurate. But you can only do that if you trust that person. If they're using you, then maybe it's not going to be best for you. So I'm not saying every partnership needs to stay together and don't break up. But I also think, just remember what you're about to get into is a relationship first, which hopefully in a healthy way will flow out to make this business actually 10x what you could do on your own. So that's one of my many lessons. And then I could list all the ways I've screwed that up, but I'll stop with my cool lesson.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I share some of those same things. I appreciate you saying all those things. Some of the things that I've reflected on are things I would do if I could do it again, which is not how life works.
Right.
But I would go back to before I became a partner and ask harder questions and do more soul work before committing to be a partner.
For sure.
And I think doing that differently with what I know now would have helped prepare me to be a better partner. And even specifically on those things is I've learned this idea and this phrase from you and Julie, and it's really helped me, and is, do you want what that means? And I didn't ask that question, before taking on a business partner. Do you want what that means? Do you want that sacrifice?
Right.
Do you want that dying to yourself from time to time?
Yeah.
Do you want that accountability? Do you want the shared leadership? Like asking these hard questions around, do you want what that means? I think, is something, that I wish I would have done a better job of. Yeah. And then you touched on another thing that I've thought a lot about that I wish I would have done a better job of. And nurturing relationships when it's easy is easy, right? It's like, this is easy. We're traveling together and doing all these fun things together. Yeah. Your kids are the same age. Like it's easy. Right. It's fun when it's easy.
Right.
And I think that what I regret and what I would challenge, a listener who has a business partner now is that leaning into the relationship when it gets hard is more important than ever. Like when you don't want to lean in, right, is when you should lean in the most. And if you fail to lean into that when you need to the most, it's going to go downhill. And sometimes it goes downhill so fast and so far you can't recover. And I think related to that is not being honest. There are so many conversations and decisions that I think back on that I did not agree with, or I wanted to go a different direction, and I was not man enough, or I was not a good enough leader to disagree, to push back, to wrestle with. It was easier just to make the decision and move on than it was to press and to deal with the conflict and to wrestle with the ideas despite its discomfort. And it was a huge mistake of mine. And I certainly don't want to speak for the other leaders, but I bet they would feel the same way on decisions I was making that they disagreed with, that they probably wish they would have said, nope, time out, time out. We're moving too fast. I don't agree. Red flag, red flag, red flag. And, that didn't happen. And so I think that's another partnership lesson that I've learned in hindsight that I really wish I would have done a better job of in the moment, that I would have served him better and the company better had I done that. So there are a lot of other things, but thanks for sharing what you shared, and those are a few things that I would encourage folks to at least consider. Those
are incredible, and I'm sure there are a lot of partners that listen, or ones that may perceive what they can get out of partnership. And of course, if we have ambition and grow in a business, we think about a partnership. If we've not experienced it, we think about it, oh man, this is going to be awesome, man. I'm going to put the freaking gas on this business, right? And that's even a perception of, this person's going to give me what I want to get this thing off the ground finally. It's even a wrong model to apply to the approach of that partner. But probably so common, I would imagine, for people that don't know. I think
you're speaking truth. You're speaking truth. That's right.
Well, okay. So as we're moving into kind of towards the end of this, I do want to. We have a little more time left, and I want you're leading the team now, Kate. In the digital agency, your own digital agency, another one, and I think that's beautiful. That's really, just to say that out loud is really pretty cool. So what a gift to have that chance, and you're leading people. How are you leading them now? How are you leading those people? In a different way, do you think? And if you throw in, here's ways I'm still not leading them well, what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there are really kind of two things that come to mind that I've tried to consciously and intentionally focus on. The first is being more intentional about my own personal growth. Something I said at Primitive all the time, is that, we have to be our best selves in order to serve our teammates and to our clients. And if I'm not my best self, I can't serve you, and I can't serve the people paying us to serve them. And I said it out loud all the time, but I lost, grasp of that in practice. And so something I'm trying to take much, much more serious in this new phase, this new chapter, is not just talking about personal leadership development, but practicing personal leadership development. And, for me, individually, it's kind of, 3 or 4 different things. It's, for me, spiritually, character. I really want to grow in character. So let's say, someone's not a Christian, or it's that's not their deal. It's like, okay, well, there are other ways to look at your character. So for me, it starts spiritually, but there's also these characteristics about my integrity and my character that I really want to work on. And so those 2 things are really important. I want to be a better leader. I think I did some things right as a leader over the course of a decade of growing the company. But I can see a lot of things as a leader that I just absolutely failed at and never grew in. And so I've really grasped a hold of those things and want to have an intentional practice of personally growing in my leadership. And then this one, might sound like a little bit weird, but I just want to be more intentional. I want to be more intentional. I want to be intentionally slower. I want to be intentionally more methodical. I want to be more intentional about the decisions I'm making. I want to be more intentional about the businesses or the projects or the things that I get involved in terms of an investment of my time and my gifts. And so the first thing I want to do in this new chapter is I want to be more intentional about my own personal growth. And then the second thing I spent a lot of time thinking about, and I want to do better, in this new opportunity, is organizational in nature, right? So one is personal in nature, leadership in nature, growth in nature. The other one's more organizationally related. And there's a handful of things that I really think about when I think about the organizational improvement. One is I want to move slower. This is hard for me because I think my gifts, there's a nature of my gifts that do well moving fast and having massive ambition and convincing other people to go along with me and all these things.
So there's that.
There's positive things there. And so learning how to balance, my ambition and my gifts with going slower and being more intentional about growth specifically, about hiring specifically, about those types of things, I think is something I've got a long ways to go on, but I really want to get better at. I want to be a more present leader. Again, I think I have the ability to build teams, to craft vision and to build teams and to find the right people and, work together to move the thing forward. Like, I think I can do that. But I want to be more present. I want to be more supportive. I want to be more aware. I want to be more helpful. I want to be more engaged with the team and the leaders and figure out how I can support them so they can be successful. And that is something that I got away from and I'd like to grow in. I mentioned finances earlier. I'm kind of embarrassed to say that over the course of 10 years, I bet I said this 1,000 times. I wish I were exaggerating. I would say this stupid phrase, and it's hard to even say because it was so immature and unwise and had so many consequences. But I would say I'm good at making money and spending money, and I don't want anything to do with the stuff in between. What an irresponsible, unwise thing to say, but even more to practice. And so in this new chapter, I'm trying to learn more about finances and to take them more seriously and to have good financial systems and processes and accountability and, financial decisions. So that's another one. Processes and systems, really, really working on the business and not just in the business, which people hear all the time. And then organizationally, the last thing I've really thought a lot about is accountability, which is really important. And it's one of the reasons that I lost everything. And it's one of those critical things that to move forward into the future, both personally, but also organizationally, is to really have strong accountability. So those are the things I'm focused on right now. I'm sure there will be some days I do them well and other days, where I don't. But I feel like if I can be intentional about my own personal growth in every way as a way to serve the whole, the organization, and then do some of those things organizationally better, I think we'll see similar results maybe on the success side, but maybe in a more healthy, more vibrant, way than what I led in the past. So that's kind of my aspiration right now.
Yeah, I love it. So if people are listening, you can rewind to when, Kade, you started talking about being intentional. You said that's one of the things, and you were rattling stuff off. That was all. Those were not just, I want to just be intentional. Those were real specific. I recognized all the things you were talking about. I know exactly the situations, the circumstances that you put intentional in front of each one of those. And that sounds like a great leadership lesson. Instead of being just saying, I want to be more intentional, is list the very specific ways that you were listing. And those have all come out of some hard things. I know what you were listing. Intentional in this way, intentional in this way. So intentionality is a real practically focused part of leadership on a very specific thing. And so if anybody is wanting to grow, I know I could list ways very practically. I need to be very much more intentional in my leadership, in my relationship. So I hope people rewind and kind of listen to that intention. That's a really big part of what I think you were saying. So what's a thing? I mean, you've listed so many principles. What's a thing could you boil it down to one? What's a thing about leadership you didn't know 10 years ago? Like you've listed a million of those already. Is there a top one? Or
I think
I know there's a lot.
Unfortunately, there's not.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you the one that came to my mind as soon as you asked the question, and that's bringing intentionality to relationships. Better intentionality to relationships. It's a really unhealthy practice to use people And again, I don't think I consciously set out to use people.
Nobody does. Yeah, probably.
But when I think of leadership, I feel like I morphed into a leader that expected people to serve me versus being a leader that existed to serve others. And this is not how life works. It's never one thing. But I feel like if I would have been able to see that when it was happening and get help and press into that and course correct, I think a lot of these things would have happened differently. And so while I don't really think it's only one thing, I think life is a holistic thing, not just a single thing.
That's true.
But from a leadership perspective, I think that's the one thing my mind always gravitates towards and honestly mourns the most and am trying to use as an alarm, like, hey, don't forget this ever again. So you don't have to be here ever again. That's something that kind of jumps out to me in my own heart and my own reflection on all this.
Oh, man, good stuff. Okay, so as we're wrapping up, I want to ask you one more question. So what is next? This is kind of a growth question around your agency now. What's next for your agency and leadership? And you keep mentioning this too, but how are you seeking to not repeat the past?
Yeah. I think there's two things that come to mind. One is just obsessively focusing on personal growth. I think I will be able to lead teams and organizations and all these things forward to the degree that I'm healthy, to the degree that I am a good leader will impact how these things move forward. And if I'm not being intentional about that growth, I will repeat the past. It's
that's scary.
Rest assured.
Yeah.
Because that's the way it works. And so I'm really, really focused on personal growth. And I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here, but in terms of moving forward, that I think is a huge contributor to moving forward and serving others and creating a successful agency. I think the other thing is some of it's, I have no choice. I signed a non-compete for a couple of years. And so the growth of the agency, by the very nature of having that non-compete where I live, which is 12 years worth of relationships and revenue I built, at my other agency. So that non-compete is forcing me to be slow, right, in growth. Yeah. And so it's giving me, I don't like it. I'd like to grow a lot faster, but it's honestly helped me have boundaries, which you've talked a lot about. It's not a boundary I would have picked. I wouldn't have picked any of this, but it's a boundary that's allowing me to grow slowly and methodically. And so I bring that up because it comes back to intentionality of saying, who are we? Who is our team? What is the culture of our organization? Who do we serve? Right? The agency prototype model you're always talking about. It's allowed me to work through that because my growth is so slow. I have literal time to work on the agency versus just growing it like a rocket ship. And I believe that those kinds of things are going to pay huge dividends in a handful of years when I am able, maybe by God's grace, to be able to grow, quicker than we are right now. Yeah. So right now, we're just under $1 million a year in revenue. We have five what I call full-time team members, and then we have a handful of what I call extended team members, which are contractors. And so, we're really focused on our culture, our processes, our systems, our finances, who we are, our buyer personas, figuring out, okay, what are we good at? What are we not good at? I feel like in my last 10 years, I try to be all things to all people just because I wanted to make money. Yeah. And that's a terrible practice, as you could probably confirm in all your work with other agency owners. So we're trying to narrow down who are we, who do we serve, what do we do well, what do we not do well. So we're trying to do that. Interestingly enough, because we're not growing that fast, I have a lot of time, to lead our team and to lead our clients. And so I actually, went to work for another agency that's been around for 21 years. very, very, very sophisticated at what they do. And so I'm also, in addition to focusing on my Flatland team, we have about 20 clients. I'm very engaged with them. I'm on strategy calls. I'm on monthly work session calls. I communicate with them often, with my team. But I'm also getting this unique opportunity, and this is very humbling, but I'm getting this unique opportunity to learn how to be a teammate. So at Flatland, I'm getting this amazing opportunity to experience a rebirth and a new opportunity to lead, which I'm very grateful for, and all the things that means, from this call. But I'm also getting to learn how to be a teammate at Square Two. And I've not been a good teammate in a long time, as I've shared this entire call. And so to be in a position where I'm not the boss, I have a role. I have a role to play. And it is to support the teammates I'm working with. It's to support the role that I was hired for. And it's been very humbling because I'm used to kind of getting to be the boss and say, this is how we're going to do it. And in this role, I'm not the boss and I'm accountable. And it's been very humbling. And I'm trying to learn, how can I be the best teammate someone's ever had? And so the way that all of this is shaping, kind of fleshing itself out after the failure, I really couldn't ask for more, right? Like I've really been given this gift.
Yeah.
I would love to go back and undo what I did.
Yeah.
If I had the option between losing Primitive or having Primitive, losing those teammates, having those teammates, practicing bad leadership versus having good leadership, I would pick not losing it all, right?
Yeah.
But I did. And what's beautiful about the impact of failure is that if you do press into it, you actually come out on the other side. And it's not better. Again, I would never pick this path.
Yeah.
This is not, I don't want this. I want to undo it, but you can't. And so to be in this moment where I'm getting to lead this team that I love, this team that trusts me, this team that supports me, and I'm getting to learn what it means to love and serve and support them, and it's providing for my family. And then I'm also getting to be a teammate, full-time W-2 employee. I have not been an employee in a long time. And so to get to do that and show up sacrificially and to be humbled and to be in a role that literally exists to support others versus support myself. What a great gift to take all these things you and I have talked about the last 50 minutes and to now be in a place where I get to put them in practice and not just talk about them, but practice them. I'm really grateful. And I have no idea what life looks like in 12 months or 18 months or 5 years from now. But I do know that being intentional about the opportunities I have in front of me right now, today, not tomorrow, not later, but now, I do think it will shape the future in a way that I can't even comprehend, how much more fruitful and meaningful and rich that it'll be. So that's where we're at. And, I'm not real for sure where we're headed. I've tried to give up on that part, of living in the future so much. So we'll see how that goes. But that's the opportunity we have and what I'm investing all my time in right now.
Wow. Well, people don't know you like I know you. And your ability to lead and grow companies fast and big is pretty crazy. People can hear about it in the last podcast. So for you to be slowed down in that way is a massive thing that has been placed on you. And then here we are at the end of the show and you're like, what a gift I've been given. You lost it all, man. And you call it a gift. So that is incredible. So maybe this can be a warning to some leaders too. You can lose it. So it's a warning to me, you can lose it. So it's, these things are not guaranteed forever. And so, we need some hindrances in our life, accountability, those things that can help us become our best selves, which now you're working on the best Kade. And you said that is the unintentional focus because I cannot become what I was before. So
no,
you challenged us, man.
Yeah. We take for granted a lot, don't we? We take for granted good partners. We take for granted the leaders that we're surrounded with that are adding tremendous value. We take advantage of our teammates. We take advantage of these opportunities that we've been given.
So much,
and, if we do that, you will lose it. And so the only alternative is to look yourself in the mirror and say, hey, self, don't take this for granted.
Right.
Enjoy this, appreciate it, serve it better. And so, you're right. We take it for granted, and I took it for granted. And by God's grace, I hope I never do it again, because I had it good. I had it real good, and so it's humbling.
Very cool. Well, Kade, thank you so much for sharing all that and coming on the show the third time. This is a different show than the other shows you were on.
Yeah, it is.
So I was, I wanted to make sure that was okay with you. This is a different show. It was going to be, I wanted it to be a different show. And you were pretty transparent. So thank you for doing that. Who knows who might hear it that needs to hear it at just the right time. Whatever they're going through on the rocket ship, or they're really getting flushed down the toilet right now.
Yeah.
Who knows, man?
I hope it helps someone, and I also hope it's an expression of my gratitude and honor, to you and Julie and the help that you've been to me.
Thanks, man.
I know this is not a sales pitch from your perspective for what you guys do, but I've been helped by you now at two pivotal times in my life in leadership. And if you're an agency owner and you're listening to this, and you don't have accountability, and you don't have hard coaching, and you don't have good financial management, you will not find anyone better at those two things than Jason and Julie. And I mean that. I mean that. And I hope there's someone who's listening to this that takes all this to heart, and unlike me, actually engages you before it's too late. And so I really appreciate what you and Julie have done for me. Yeah. And I'm very grateful. So I hope you guys know how appreciative I am of you.
Oh, well, you tell us all the time. So we do know, and you're a pretty honest person. So, and we love you too. So we're grateful, for that. And thank you for coming on the show and, sharing this with all of our listeners. So really appreciate you. And we'll share this with as many people as we can. Thanks again, Kade.
Thanks, Jason.
We'll see you, man. Bye-bye.